Seth Rollins appeared on Ryan Satin's new Out of Character podcast, and he talked about working in front of the Thunderdome crowd as opposed to a live audience for the past year. And he had some interesting comments. This is what Seth had to say. He said, "I still think social media plays quite a role in how shows are written and how characters are portrayed. The Thunderdome has allowed us to tell our stories a little cleaner in the sense that things aren't as up and down as they normally would be. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not entirely sure. I miss the fans and live interaction, but I like being able to cut a promo and getting all the way through without having to side-eye the audience. It's nice to get a thought out without being interrupted by CM Punk chants." I hope he realizes that by saying that, he can now expect even more CM Punk chants for his segments on Raw and SmackDown once the fans are back in the buildings full time. I'm not sure why you would even draw attention to that if it bothers you so much, especially if you're a heel. You have to know that if you openly talk about it, you're only going to encourage more of it. You would think he would realize this. He continues on. "Some stories have overstayed their welcome, but we've definitely been allowed to tell fully fleshed out stories over 6 or 7 months that we would not get through normally because a live crowd would force creative to change course. I had a blast working with the Mysterios, although things got carried away at the end. I was proud of the eye for an eye match. I would go to the live events and the response was not what you would see on TV. Crowds were two totally different crowds. At a live event, the crowd would be 100% pro Rollins and it was a party. Then we'd come to TV and the latter half would be down my throat. It's very confusing and sometimes I think it pushes our creative process in directions that maybe we shouldn't be going. But that's how the business is these days and you got to figure it out and adapt." Now, I saw some people riled up by his comments. He's right and he's wrong. He's right about it now being easier for guys to get through promos without having to pause every 2 seconds for the what chant. It's honestly the one thing I'm not looking forward to once crowds are back, are the stupid what chants. You know, it was fun for a time when Austin started doing it. Vince McMahon would play off of them well. Undertaker still has the greatest comeback of all time to the what chant. Hulk Hogan has the second best. They chanted what at him and he just goes, "What you gonna do?" I always thought that was clever. Not as good as The Undertaker, but it was still clever. But after 5 years of it, it ran its course, and here we are 20 years later, and it serves no purpose. Absolutely serves no purpose. The Punk chant is different. It is dumb, but I would argue that if you're constantly being inundated by CM Punk chants, that means that you're boring. And your audience is demanding that you don't bore them. And do a better job of giving them something to be entertained by. Give them a reason to care about what it is that you're saying. And if it's a writing issue, then it needs to be addressed from within. Speak up about it behind the scenes and address it from within. But if you're going out there and you're cutting boring promos, you can side-eye the audience all you want, CrossFit Jesus. You can side-eye me. You can side-eye everybody else. They're not going to give a shit about what you are saying. And Seth Rollins, during that entire Messiah run that he had, was the worst offender of them all. His promos were so incredibly dull. Even the empty chairs at the Performance Center couldn't stand him. But for the what stuff, you know, there is a trick to it that a lot of these WWE guys evidently have not figured out. And I don't understand why, because it's only been 20 years. But the trick is that you can shut them down by speeding up your cadence. Even Austin himself has talked about this. You speed up the cadence of your speech. Instead of pausing every 5 seconds and giving them an opening to say it. You know, a lot of these wrestlers have that overly scripted sounding way of doing their promos, so they take pauses. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Or they're pausing because they're trying to remember what their lines are. This is one of the things that Seth Rollins doesn't seem to understand. And it's very interesting how this isn't really a problem outside of WWE. I'm not talking about the what chants, but, you know, like the crowds hijacking shows. It really only is a WWE problem. Now, I'm not saying it never happens anywhere else, but it really was only a recurring issue in WWE. Now, why is that? Why do you think that is? Learn to do a better job of countering them, and they won't be an issue anymore. If you keep pausing for them, they're never going to go away. But this was the facepalm moment right here in what he said. He talked about liking the fact that they have been able to tell more fleshed out stories without the crowds crapping on them, while admitting that his story with the Mysterios went on longer than it should have. He said things got carried away at the end with it. I would say things got carried away when they decided to give Rey Mysterio a fucking gumball for an eye and popped it out of his skull. Then he says in front of crowds they wouldn't have been able to get through a story like that without the fans forcing creative to change course. That's what the fans are there for. It's too bad we didn't have fans in the building for that, because then they could have rightfully shit all over it because it sucked. That's what pro wrestling is. The fans dictate what works and what doesn't. You come up with the stories. You write the stories. The talent has to go out there and deliver, but the fans ultimately decide if it's good or bad. They decide what works and what doesn't, and they will not be shy about letting you know if it's bad. But now WWE, they have what they've always wanted. And this is my biggest fear coming out of this pandemic as we slowly come out of these pandemic shows and go back to live audiences. That doesn't mean that they're going to stop with the piped-in manufactured crowd noise and chants. WWE, they have what they've always wanted. They get to make that judgment themselves. They take it out of our hands and they get to make the call. Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard dictate what works now and what doesn't. And we see how well that worked out, especially on Monday Night Raw. The fans force creative changes when you are creative sucks. Apparently Seth Rollins doesn't like that. He says he misses the fans. That's what he says. He goes, I miss live crowds. Do you? Do you really? I mean, he makes a few good points here that I agree with, but man, does he come off as tone deaf with some of these comments. You know, in our system of government here in this country, we have 3 branches, and those branches exist as a check on the others. So no one branch has, too much power consolidated in that one branch. It's not a perfect system, but, it does make sense, and it's good that we have it. We need the fans as a check on a lot of the stuff that this company over the years has been putting out. And I think if we've learned nothing else from this pandemic, we have learned that. You would think the talent would realize that and would want that. But apparently that may not be the case. We finally have a premiere date for Season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring on Vice TV, Thursday, May 6th. The season kicks off with a 2-hour premiere dedicated to the loose cannon Brian Pillman. Per The Observer, that will be followed by episodes on Nick Gage, Collision in Korea, The Ultimate Warrior, Grizzly Smith and the Smith family, which includes Jake the Snake Roberts, and Dynamite Kid. And there will be a second half of the season airing later in the year, so they're apparently going to break it up into 2 parts. WWE documentary coming to Peacock soon. Just learned about this yesterday. Coming to Peacock and the network everywhere else. This summer, on Vladimir the Superfan. This was very cool to find out. This is the description of the documentary that is coming soon. The Story of Vladimir tells the life story of Vladimir Abuzid, one of the most devoted and recognizable fans in WWE history. He came to Manhattan from Haiti as a child and quickly found his passion for living through the lens of sports entertainment. From the time I started watching wrestling in that late 80s period, and watching a lot of those old Madison Square Garden shows, I can remember seeing Vladimir in those first few rows on almost every single one of those shows. And then over the years, the big WWE pay-per-views, whether it was at the Garden or even other places, there he was. He was always there. Today you have green shirt guy in the front row and long hair guy with his grandmother or whatever, his mom whoever these people are that we always see in the front row at these WWE events, well, back then, it was Vladimir. He was one of the names that you saw at all of these events. And he has a very unique look. He had the glasses on. He always had the big muscles, the muscular arms. He looked more cut than some of the wrestlers did. So he stands out when you see him. You know exactly who he is. I got the chance to meet him finally on Bourbon Street in New Orleans over WrestleMania 30 weekend. It felt like I had found Waldo. I was so excited to see Vladimir. But this is the type of content I like to see on the network.